Welcome back to This Was Supposed to Be Easy, your go-to podcast for connection, joy, and a good dose of laughter.
Hosted by two friends who've seen enough of life to know that it's never as simple as it sounds
or looks.
Each conversation celebrates the diverse journeys we travel, the moments of bravery, the strength we didn't know we had, and the joy we find along the way.
Because let's be honest, life is full of things that were supposed to be easy, but turned out to be harder.
And definitely funnier
than we thought. This is Amy.
And this is Cheryl. And if it were easy, we wouldn't be here. Amy, it's been a week since we talked about your personal change project. I'm wondering if you have any stories for us, updates.
So not as many as I would hope, because, in the perfect world of things, I would say it's done, it's amazing, and that is not the case, but that is totally all right too. That's unrealistic. And I can respect that. So I did go through, starting with like my drawer that I have talked a lot, like my set of drawers that I have talked about, and kind of started identifying stuff. So I have really thought about what is realistic for me to keep, what is realistic for me to get rid of. I did go through and like identify straight up trash, like small ripped pieces of paper, extra cups, those type of stuff, and have removed a lot of those.
Okay.
The issues with that is that those things always come back, right? Like life happens and they come back. So what I'm trying to think about now is like, what is a good end of day process or beginning of day process? Like at the end of my day, can I commit to removing all of the cups and glasses and plates or dishes, things like that, that I might have used that day? And any small pieces of paper that, okay, yep, as you show me your bowl, but those types of things that could they find their way to the trash before I even end my time at my desk, so that I start my desk afresh the next morning. Or if that seems unrealistic, can I start my day by removing all of the things that I didn't take away the day before that I'm not going to need for that day, so that I'm prioritizing or making more purposeful the day of what I'm going to need or what I might need. And then the other thing is the stuff that I did decide to get rid of. I did take something that you had said about like the idea of you all just put whatever you don't need in the office, like kind of out in front and say, take, free to a good home, enjoy. So I did start going through some of like those training manuals, things like that. I have a lot of friends and colleagues in the early childhood world. Is there any programs that I can donate them to? Is that something that somebody else might benefit from and it can go and it could be used versus just sitting here and taking up space? I have not reached out yet of who might need some of those things, but that is where I feel very comfortable doing so and letting that stuff go. Okay. So again, not quite as far as I would like to be, but absolutely thought process started, and some of my space, because I have removed some of that more trash like stuff that was taking up. Oh, and in doing so, one of the times that I've kind of identified is I'm on a lot of, I call them like listening meetings. They're those webinars and things like that I am often sitting there just listening to for an hour. And so that feels like a time that if I have my notes open and I'm able to continue to take my notes and things like that, if I'm somehow working, kind of categorizing and removing things from my desk, that seems like a time that I can kind of double dip my brain space and do some things towards that might not be otherwise like immediately dedicated to it.
Well, and that's probably the piece about how to use your time, right? You said you've already narrowed down your activities to a list of things you're not willing to give up.
Right.
So this is a way, or maybe I should say, you've identified an action or an activity that maybe is okay to multitask during, because it's not as critical as when you're needing to be fully present and interacting and engaged.
Right. Yeah. And on camera and doing all of those things. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So I will tell you, my desk looks really messy right now, but it's literally only one layer of mess. And so I also have been thinking about, and when I walk in the morning and see it, thinking, ooh, I need an end of the day habit. So I'll be curious about whether you find that end of the day works better or beginning of the day works better. I'll be curious about that. And I emptied my backpack. So, like,
Oh,
I sat down on my office floor and literally pulled everything out of all the pockets of the backpack, which I gotta tell you, it's probably been 2 years. Then filled a trash bag with things, and Kevin came by to grab the trash bag, and he said, "Is this all from your backpack?" And I said, "It is." And man, does it weigh a lot less now. But it does mean there's still a few piles on my floor, like, 6 pens and, some things I need to be home now that they're out of my backpack. But, had to share that little, "Here's what I did this week."
that's awesome. And actually, it's interesting you say that because I kind of know I need to do the same thing. In fact, just got back from a conference yesterday afternoon. And while I was at the conference, kind of going through my backpack, realized just quite how much stuff I have accumulated, yet also how I still have things that I need that are not in there. I was
Mhm.
looking for like my charging brick, and I usually try to keep a set of tech pouches where I can have my things wrapped up and stuff. And frankly, it's just gotten a little bit more chaotic and stuff's just been thrown in there. So that also is something that I need to do
Yeah.
because my backpack is a true extension of my desk. If I'm thinking
Mhm.
about it, it really is.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for update after 1 week, and we will check in again next week.
Sounds good. So I was having a conversation this week that I think might be a little different than some of the other conversations that we might have had, but I think it's relevant. So let me put it out there.
Hit me.
We we have, or I should say, I was attending a meeting with other individuals who work in some form of HR, professional development, different roles like that. And I was attending this meeting this week, and we're all from different types of organizations, businesses. So there was not really a general thread, except that we all provided some type of professional development opportunities.
Okay.
And individuals were saying that within their organization, they were really struggling to find and then maybe develop, but definitely find the next layer of leadership. And so I ended up taking this topic to one of my classes this week, and they said, yes, that is something that individuals are showing. And it got me thinking about the classes that you're building out right now on leadership. It makes me think a little bit about not only the degree I'm getting, but also the degrees that I've gotten specifically in leadership and how much leadership kind of feels like a buzzword, but it's really relevant, especially to those that are working.
Amy, I think I've had several similar experiences, some even for myself in terms of quite a few years ago making very particular decisions for me, but I've also had conversations with people about this kind of struggle and questioning whether it's a generational viewpoint on leadership or if it's a post COVID leadership situation. I do think that there are probably multiple pathways that we could explore if we move forward with this idea about what I'm going to say what is it that could make leadership more appealing. But I think even to talk about that, we probably have to start with why.
Yes, I think that that is definitely a good starting point. So I know for you and I, we are both within the Generation X leadership. I've also recognized that we were kind of the tail end of the you take a job and you live that job your entire life. And we've talked
Right.
in previous episodes that that's a little more true for you than myself. Like you have gone into a entity of that you've had numerous jobs within your professional career, but at the same organization for the most part.
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
Where I have switched around a little bit more. And when it comes to leadership, I really fell in to my first leadership position.
Mm-hmm.
I know we talked about
Yeah.
it briefly, but just as kind of if this is somebody listening to it new, I took over being a early childhood center director after I was a preschool teacher. The center director was getting ready to leave about a year into the center opening and asked if I was interested in the position. I interviewed for it. I was 25 years old, really 24 years old when I took on that role, pregnant with my first child, finishing up a master's degree in counseling, and didn't really know what I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so the struggle that became of that is I also didn't have anyone I could ask, because in this particular role, the other individuals that had very similar positions, everybody was really competitive because we were all kind of competing for the same families. I didn't have the opportunity to reach out to another center director in my area and say, like, hey, what do I do about this? And at the time, licensing felt so much more like policing versus partnering with, that I
Mm-hmm.
didn't feel like I could go to that person and say, like, I don't know what I don't know. Can you help me? Because then I would look like I didn't know. And that's actually one of the ways you and I got to know each other better is I pretty soon thereafter had to go back to school and get a degree in early childhood education. And you were my academic advisor for that degree. And we had known each other and had spoken, but that was really kind of how we started talking more in depth. But I think of that as leadership has really led me on a pathway of wanting to know more about leadership. And ultimately, I ended up doing my master's degree in leadership. There's a big leadership component within my doctoral program. But even that aside, I feel like it's also really important. I am a firm believer in that leadership is a mindset, not just a role. But I
Mm-hmm.
think for the purpose of today, we kind of want to talk about it in both capacities.
So you talk about a mindset, and I want to ask you, growing up, did you see yourself as a leader?
So I didn't until I actually did think about that. So I was a pretty shy young kid. And I thought that stayed with me. But when I think back, I was in maybe third grade and I joined student council.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like my student council rep for third, fourth, and fifth grade. In fifth grade, I ran for student council president of the school. I didn't get it, but I did run for it. And then stayed on student council for sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, and ran again for student council and didn't get it. But I did do those things, but I also was, and I don't know if this was necessarily leadership or I was really the kid that a lot of adults liked because I was pretty precocious. And I might have even talked about this before too, but like I was in fifth grade, I got like release time where I would go down to the office and call all the parents for kindergarten roundup and tell them of their time slots. And I made all those phone calls in preparation. And then at the last hour of every day, I would go down to the kindergarten classroom and read to them and help them get their coats and jackets and do all of those types of things. I was always on like the lunchtime safety patrol. I was always kind of given those where I would, be at the door and greet people and things. So I probably was in a leadership role more than I ever really thought about. Because by the time I went to high school, I wasn't really a joiner, but I was a worker. And
Mm-hmm.
so I kind of started my own childcare babysitting business at that time. And sometimes I was babysitting more than 40 hours a week, even during the school week, and then 50 to 60 hours a week during the summer. Numerous families had definite reoccurring families that I watched all the time. And then ended up doing a certification through our CTE program where I could then work in a childcare facility when I was 17 instead of 18, and did that right away too. And I was always looking for opportunities to develop skills. Like
Mm-hmm.
that was something that was really important to me. Whenever I saw an opportunity that might set me aside a little bit for something future oriented, I took it.
That's because one of your signature strengths is lifelong learning.
Yes, yes, it is. I just didn't know it when I was 16 years
Right,
old.
right, right. Well, I mean, I ask you that question because I'm thinking about my own history. And I grew up being told I was a leader. My mother constantly told me I was a leader, and it's just making me think about, did she see that in me and point it out so that I too would see it? Or did she want me to be? And so she gave me that identity. I'll probably never know the answer to that.
Right.
But just hearing you talk about all of those opportunities, right? Like from student council all the way through to where you are now, even, I think you're right. We are sort of that end of that generation that heard, work hard, get promoted, lead others, now you're successful or now you've made it. But we've realized along the way, especially in early childhood, right? A great teacher doesn't always make a great director. Those are two very different skill sets. And I think even when you think about all of the different leadership pathways, there are some that I gravitate towards and others that I have firmly, firmly shut the door on and said, no way. There's no way I want to do that because that's a bit too heavy or not the kind of commitment that I'm willing to take on right now. And so I'm just sort of sitting here thinking about that with the reference you made to mindsets and different types of leadership and our conversation last week about wanting to amplify what's going right and what's going well and how that might fit into a mindset for leadership.
I would have to say, watching how people look at you and the things that you do now, I bet you probably always have had some level of leadership, not having known you as a child. But I think that your mom was probably right in that you did. And the reason I say that is because I think you're willing to do things that other people only talk about. And I think you and I are both a little bit like that, where we've both been paid the compliment before of we're willing to kind of put maybe the fear or the uncertainty aside to say like, hey, let's do this. Let's try it. We can think of all the things that could go wrong, but also what could go right or what could we learn from it if we did. And I think that those are leadership skills because I think the good leaders out there know themselves the best first. And I think that that is something that's really important. I know right now in like elementary schools or even middle school and high school, I've started to see a lot more leadership type programming. And when I've looked at some of those children leadership programs or young adults, it's really those that have some type of influence, some that people just naturally look to say like, well, what are you going to do? And I used to always joke, especially when talking with my own kids, like if you have that leadership piece, use your skills for good, not bad. Be Spider-Man in the situation. With great power comes, great responsibility. So people are looking to you to say like, is this something that I need to listen a little bit more to, or is this something that like maybe feels a little too much? But they look to you for things. But I think also with leadership then as well, I think there's a good leadership. I'm going to specify it is also in the role of support and not being afraid to ask for support or give support. And I'm going to say those equally because a lot of individuals give support well and ask for support not so good. And we could say support, we could say help, we could say, any things. And I know we've talked about maybe having a conversation of how to ask for help or ask for support well. And we can certainly put that on the list of something to do in one of our conversations too. But I think that somebody is learning how to do that has to be able to do the things that they expect others to do first.
Right. I mean, you're talking about structural components that make a leadership role either fulfilling and something where you thrive, or structural components where you're just taking the hit for everything, right? It's very emotional in terms of labor, or you're constantly managing crises, or you're listening to everyone's complaints. There's structural pieces that I think have helped me make decisions about the different pathways that I choose. And when I actually step forward and say, I don't want that.
Well, I think that's a great point. Like you just mentioned some of the reasons I think that people are maybe shying away from leadership roles. Like everything you just mentioned right there, really emotionally charged staff, charged coworkers, colleagues, a lot of emotion that might be less than positive. I think you mentioned long hours, a pretty wide knowledge base. I mean, none of those things are like, yes, sign me up. I want people to come cry on my in my chair as much as possible, and I want to be available 24 hours a day. And I don't think that has to be the case, but I think for the longest time that's what leadership looked like or was being told it looked like. And so then who wants to sign up for that?
Yeah. And so while I love to focus on the what's going right, what's going well, what can we amplify, I do think it's really important to maybe expose or uncover what potentially this might be where the generational piece is, right? Because I do think that people that are younger than us, Amy, have seen maybe the mistakes of our generation or other generations, or seen the toll that the way we've worked has taken on us. And I think they've seen things that we aren't even necessarily seeing yet. I'd like to take just a couple of minutes to talk about what that looks like in some cases, right? We aren't experts on this, right? But what are some of those things that make people step away from leadership or not choose that in the first place?
Yes, I think that as you say that, I had actually a lot of thoughts that kind of went through my head and even things that we've talked about on the show before.
Okay.
And as we've talked on the show, we've had multiple episodes where we've used the word balance, right? And so not
Balance better.
necessarily
That's my goal.
right, balance better. It's not even, necessarily work-life balance, but of course that's what we could talk about, but just balance.
Mm.
How do we do that? And I think so many examples that were just given were how balance was not achieved. But I think also, if we didn't mention that, I think life changed for a lot of people in 2020 and around COVID and all of that, and
Mhm.
individuals left the workplace or weren't appreciated in the workplace. I think the world of work changed at that time, and especially the flexibility that was needed to take care of family versus being an employee. And I think also the increase in remote work. I think the ability to do your job in the time frame that you need your job to be. I think all of those things came to the surface for a lot of people. And so because of all of those things, the way we work is different too. And so
Yeah.
I just wanted to talk about that. But yes, no, say what you were saying. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
well, that's totally fine because as you said that, I was thinking I have probably said this before, but at a university, you have a department chair. At least where I work, that department chair has a lot more responsibility, but they don't really have more authority. They're still your faculty colleague member, but they have to deal with so many more problems, so many more decisions, so many more hours that they're expected to be on call or on site. So there's all of this responsibility without, and I'm not a fan of the word control, but I'll use it loosely right now, or they're more accountable, but they don't have the authority that goes along with that accountability. They're so much more emotionally involved with what's happening with their colleagues, but that's often invisible and not acknowledged. And I remember during the pandemic, Joellen, our friend Joellen, was my chair at the time, and she recently had a sabbatical just this time last year, and she called it her recovery or her recuperation from that time period. Like, she 5 years out from the beginning of the pandemic was still feeling that intense need, having stepped away from the role of chair at least a couple 2 years maybe since, still needed to recover from that. And so you're right. I do think acknowledging what shifted in the pandemic is pretty important, because a lot of jobs felt like they were 24/7 at that point, and you were just running to get ahead of the next thing you had to figure out. And then when people were successful at that, even though maybe more people were able to work at home or whatever it is, well, then all of a sudden there wasn't the I left the office, now I have my home life, but work was everywhere now. There was this, I think, intense loss of flexibility and that word balance, and even your identity of who you were at work and who you are at home. And once we were successful at doing it, even though it was taking a greater and greater and greater toll on a lot of people, it became the norm of expectation at the same time.
Yes. I think all of that. And you're right too. So again, going back to the idea of balance and what you just said, I think like remote work for myself has been really, really good.
Me too.
I have also for you too. Yeah. For many individuals I have talked to, they've struggled a little bit with remote work. But I have also had individuals that have said, or talked to individuals that have said that the flexibility of being able to work, to be able to use the day as they need to. So maybe they are parenting a young child at home. And so they do the majority of their work at nap times in the afternoon, check in the morning, but they're doing little bursts of work all day long. But when then people kind of log off at night in that stereotypical way, that's when they're really ramping up because they might have support from other family members or things like that. Or they wait until their child goes to sleep at 7 or 8 at night, and then they're really hopping on and doing hours worth of work then.
Yeah.
And so they have the opportunity to not work in little bursts as they're maybe caring for their child or things like that. But their headspace, we talk about switch tasking and the cost of switch tasking instead of multitasking. That switch tasking then comes at a greater cost. Where if you and I are sitting down and we're really into a project, we can take the 4 hours to finish off a project. But if I'm sitting down and I'm responsible for my young children that are at home and I only have an hour during nap time, I might be really into that. And then I have to put that aside, be the parent that I need to be and the caretaker in that moment while I'm still thinking about that, and then pick it back up when I can. And so I'm switching a lot more often, and that comes at an emotional weight or an emotional cost. And so when doing those types of things, that also is another reason to say, am I in the life space, the head space that I can be in order to take on a leadership
Mhm.
position as well?
Mhm. Well, and I hope this is a fit in terms of follow-up to what you just said, but because you were talking about that, working from home and working remotely and all of the task switching, I think about I don't right now I'm thinking about the different pathways and different choices, and wanting to sort of move our conversation back to the hope and the possibility and what does make people say yes. And as I was listening to you and thinking about myself, I do work remotely some days, and then some days I am on campus as well. But as I think about the different leadership opportunities I've said yes to versus the ones I've said no to, sometimes it's about very specific expectations in that leadership role. And so, again, back to this topic of working at home, right now, well, forever, I'm going to say, I would not say yes to being a department chair, although it is a decision that is typically pulling from someone in our faculty group, right? But I live 2.5 hours away from work, and a department chair is typically in their office 5 days a week, all year long, most of that daytime period. And I prefer to be able to work at home for some of those days. And so there are other leadership opportunities like coordinating our online early childhood programs, right? That I can do regardless of where my body is, even though it's a lot of work. And so I found that kind of flexibility as the thing that allowed me to say, yes, I'll take on this leadership role while I will not take on that leadership role. And so I do want to talk about that. Like what are some things that make leadership worth saying yes to? I'm going to throw in one more little caveat. This is for personal benefit right now because we are in the middle of getting ready to announce and then launch an early childhood leadership master's program. And there are 6 courses that are required courses in that program. 4 of them have been developed. I'm in the position right now of, even as you worded it, Amy, I'm developing the send off course, that final experiential, give it a try, and really focusing in on choosing your power, right? Like, as a leader, who do you see yourself wanting to be? And what is that pathway, at least right now? What is that pathway, and how can you make good choices as you're choosing that path? So give me all the good stuff you've got so I can develop this course into the best possible thing that ever lived.
Yes. Yes. And I realize I've said yes so much, but so much of what we've talked about has actually gotten me really excited to think about those things. Because one of the things that I'm doing kind of in relationship is right now within my job, I'm helping develop a mentorship credential, which is also an opportunity to build people's leadership pathways
Yes.
through a skill set. Everything you were saying really, where I want to expand is, so if we're going to kind of talk to those that are in some type of control over what their leadership looks like within their business, organization, group. It doesn't have to be work. It could be a social group you're a part of or something you volunteer for. I think one of the things that is so important is to recognize those leadership opportunities, and they don't have to be overseeing people if someone is not equipped or desires to oversee people.
Mhm.
Like, are there still leadership opportunities out there to oversee systems? Are there leadership opportunities out there to develop? Are there leadership opportunities out there if they think they might want to be people-y? Do they have the opportunity for skills? Because one of the things that you touched on briefly, but I think it's so important, I just want to reiterate it in
Mhm.
case it was glossed over a little bit, is that leadership as we know it isn't just necessarily one thing, but it's a set of skills. And so often individuals think that businesses, companies think that, so for your example, you're a really good instructor, so therefore you must be a really good chair. Or you're a really good widget maker, so therefore you must be the best leader of all the widget makers. Because you're good at the skill, because you have the skill, doesn't necessarily mean that you are good at overseeing and developing other people who also have that skill.
Right.
And we do that too often. And I think that that is something that I would encourage any individual who is exploring leadership, whether it be the individual who's looking to move into a bigger position or the organization that's looking at someone specifically. One, I would say talk to the person about what skills they have, where they see themselves shine, and what they want to do. But then also, if you're in the position that you think you want to be in a leadership role, if you are a really good widget maker, but you want to move into the director of widget makers, then ask somebody to say, what do I need to develop within myself to know what to do? Like, what is the director of widget makers skill set should it be? I know I say that, but
I
it's just
I
because
lo
it's so universal.
I just love the widget makers.
Yes, yes. But, I mean, it really, but it could be any insert whatever your role is now. But I think too, for a long time, I was always told, well, if you want to get a skill, you have to go to school. And that is why now I have found myself in 15 years of higher education as a student. And I am very, very fortunate in that financially, I have been in a position to be able to do those things, I've also not always had to pay for my education. Now, that aside, I also have taken numerous trainings. I have been a part of multiple cohorts. I have developed skills in other ways. And so I would say, too, if you are a person who's like, yeah, I would love to develop skills, but I don't have the opportunity to go back to school, I would say you don't have to. There's places to go and get those skills. But if you're an organization who's saying you want somebody to move into this, then it's also, in my opinion, your responsibility to help them seek out the opportunities to build those skills in the best way for that person.
So I've heard you say to pay attention to multiple kinds of leadership or multiple ways to lead. It doesn't just have to be about managing or coordinating other people. And I've heard you say learn, right? Like go out there, learn what you need to learn, always be adding to that knowledge. I want to throw in, well, I've probably thrown in so many times in the last 4 weeks boundaries, right? Like I've talked about micro boundaries, but I want to throw in that to enjoy leadership. And I think right now in this day and age, to be successful at leadership, you have to get good at, as the leader, setting clear boundaries and expectations. But I also think as the structure, as the organization, as you're creating positions of leadership, you want to be thinking about having clear boundaries in place for those people who will be your leaders, because no one benefits when the leader is a martyr
No.
and they just take on more and more and more and more as they sink and sink and sink and sink, right? It doesn't help the leader. It doesn't help the people who might want to follow that leader or who might want to, be in that position at any given point in time, or their colleagues, right? Who then feel like, now I have to be the martyr too. Let's emphasize leadership with those structures, with those supports, with those mindsets of learning, with those boundaries that help you stay on your path and do it well while other people are following complementary paths and doing them well, so that it's not looked at as you're not doing enough, you're not, you're not exhausted enough to be able to do it well. There's almost this stigma that you have to be overwhelmed if you're doing your job. People don't want to be overwhelmed. They aren't saying I want less responsibility. They just want leadership that doesn't cost them everything else in their life.
Well, and I think to expand on that, as the existing leader, you have to not only talk about those skills, but demonstrate them.
Mhm.
So if you're saying you have to show what holding a boundary and celebrate holding a boundary looks like. We've talked about boundaries before with friends. We've talked about boundaries the end of the day. But like, here's an example. If you say, oh, within my organization, I respect work-life balance and we are a 37 and a half hour, a 40-hour shop, do not work more than 40 hours. But then every evening I'm going well over, 4 hours of sending emails and doing additional work. Then is that showing to other individuals that we value work-life balance if I don't have that, like I can't
Yeah.
clock off. But the other part, same thing with if you don't use your vacation time, but does that mean somebody else then feels guilty for using their vacation time like they shouldn't be? Because if that's the case, somebody might say, hey, I don't want to be in a spot where I can never take my vacations. I want to be able to travel when I want to travel or do this. And I think also then what goes maybe into play is, so for anyone who has control over shaping a leadership position right now, I think too, if you are looking at hiring or developing someone in-house into a leadership role, do you show that you accept boundary holding as something positive?
Yeah.
Or do you look at the person who holds a boundary that says like, hey, it's 5 o'clock. I'm going to my child's soccer game. It's 5 o'clock. I got a date with dinner and a glass of wine and peace out. I'm done. I'll see you in the morning. We say, yeah, that's great. Or do we look at that employee as like, "Oh, they do the bare minimum and it's not like we're going to get more from them. So we're not going to look to advance them." Like, do
Yeah.
you celebrate the individuals that hold a boundary?
Yeah. And are you demonstrating leadership that others would want to step into, right? By being that person who is holding the boundaries and appreciating the boundaries. I'm just going to say, as I'm thinking about this class that I'm about to develop, I want to experiment with maybe some sort of beginning of the course question about what boundaries you need to set for yourself right now as you're a student that's also probably employed and probably in some level of leadership. What boundaries do you want to set this semester so that you can be successful? And then we can explore that along the way. Like, when were your boundaries challenged, and were there times where you sacrificed something or made a decision not to? I think I might play with that a bit more, Amy.
I like that. I like that one a lot. I think I would also really encourage you maybe to tie into this course as well that leadership shouldn't happen in a bubble. And I think that individuals too often, I know even in my own role, kind of what I started to say in the past was that I felt like I was leading in a bubble and I didn't know who I could count on
Mhm.
because the individual above me within the organization didn't know what I was doing because I was the top of that line of skill. And then I didn't feel like I could go to my staff and say, I'm falling apart and I don't know what I'm doing because I had to have some level of, and I was competent, but I,
You had
I
to look
was
like a leader, right?
right, right. But I felt like, oh, I can't really say that and have them trust that, like, I know what I'm doing. And I didn't have colleagues across the field at that time within a collected area. And we didn't have access to online courses and things like that or online support groups that we do now. But I didn't know where to go. And so, again, from that leadership, if you are in a leadership position or you are helping move somebody in, it cannot be done in a bubble. And I think creating networking and opportunities for network so that when somebody knows where to go when they have a question. And I'm even going to encourage them to say, maybe somebody in the field that's not even necessarily within their organization, are they allowed to go to say, like, hey, I don't know the answer to this. I'm trying to do this thing, or I need help recently. So I run leadership courses. I've recently had individuals say, I don't know how to support some of these things and to support some of the roles for other people, but also kind of all of the pieces combined. And so I think that it's important when we are looking at leadership groups, how we can give them that level of support, the professional place to ask questions, the opportunities to form support groups, and also to know that there are resources available, whether that be an association, whether that be more classes, whether that be some type of group. Maybe that also might be something that they form within their own friendship group. We've talked a lot
Mhm,
about
mhm,
friendships,
mhm.
but other people who are maybe doing similar things that they can understand. So, like, one example I was thinking about is the individuals, and this is kind of where I was going before my brain squirreled in 900 different directions, was that when people come to them having their own breakdown. In fact, I was just in the process of creating this mentorship course about how to be a mentor. And so many individuals were saying they don't need a mentor how to learn the skill, they need a life coach. So it's also that ability to recognize, what do you really need to be
Find
able
it.
to do right and find it. So do you
Yeah.
need a life coach? Do you need a skill set? Do you need a mindset
Mhm,
readjustment? Do you need some social time?
mhm.
Again, do you need to learn how to hold boundaries? Do you need how to listen better? But also being well enough aware to look at what it is that pieces that all together.
Yeah, and this might backtrack just a second, but as you were talking, I was thinking about what some of those groups are out there. You mentioned it could be right there within your own friend group. If you remember last fall, a colleague of ours, Rhonda, invited me to a leadership event a few hours away from where you live where I work. And when I went, I realized, she's a member of this group for entrepreneurs that have speakers and they support each other and they have different training courses. And, she has found that relationship, people she can go to with questions through an international organization that has a local chapter where she can work with people. In my role as president of a governing board, I've learned and discovered that, wow, my biweekly meetings with the executive director or CEO, that's a great place for me to have some of those conversations that I need to have as a leader. I have an executive committee. Sometimes when I have to make a decision, I say, I'm not comfortable doing that alone. I need to go to the executive committee and run it by them. Within that whole national structure, there's a president's circle, where once a month people are together online and you can have that opportunity to talk to other people in that same role. And so there's people out there for you that can help you live and work outside of that bubble that you mentioned, Amy, right? That can be your sounding board. And it is so true that's a critical piece that we need so that it isn't exhausting all the time and it isn't so much pressure all the time, right? It does make it a little bit easier. And that's what we're all about, right, Amy?
It is. So, listeners, if this resonates with you, I would love for you to think about what type of leader or leadership are you interested in? What skills do you have? What skills would you like to have more of? And if you are in a leadership role, what do you want to do to help develop and find that next layer of leader that might be out there that hasn't been found yet?
Yeah. Like, what would the role itself even need to look like for you to be able to say yes?
I think this is an important time to say that leadership is not a one size fits all opportunity. And so there are a lot of resources that are at your disposal. And if leadership is something that you find interesting and you want to expand on, watch a TED Talk, watch a YouTube video, grab a book. We can make some recommendations on the website on our socials, but also then let us know what you're thinking and what you find, because I'm sure that there's opportunities for further conversations with it. Thanks for tuning in to This Was Supposed to Be Easy. Remember, the best stories are the ones we live.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep the conversation going, because life may not be easy, but listening in should be.
Stay curious, stay connected, and keep wondering.